Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War news update for the 6th of August 2023. This is a second video in my daily news update. I split it into two due to YouTube often restricting my first video. I don't think I've done anything dodgy today. Right, the first place that I'm going to go to in this video is the frontline update, and to be quite frank, my knowledge of the front line is not as good as it normally is due to being on holiday and not being able to pore over maps and sources in the way that I usually would. So I'm going to lean quite heavily today, at least, on Radu Hosu, who's a Romanian analyst who has quite an upbeat, often summary of what's going on the front line. So this will skew pro-Ukrainian rather than looking at where the Russians have done better in certain places. I will try and get a more balanced view tomorrow, hopefully, when I sort of get a little bit more embedded in what I'm doing and how I'm organizing my day, my days and whatnot. But anyway, he says he doesn't really talk about in the northeast where if you remember, Kupiansk down to Svatova, then to Crimea, the Russians are pushing. They're pushing up near Liman-Pershi here, and they're pushing down near Svatova. Although, from what I can gather, they've lost quite a bit of equipment by Svatova, and they are being pushed back still. Indeed, Global War Monitor here says Ukraine advance in the Luhansk Oblast and eliminating all Russian gains since July in the Crimea to Svatova area, and they've added 1.8 square kilometers to the liberated status. This is to the west of Karmazianivka. This is pretty much getting back to where the Russians actually started. So if this source is to be trusted, then the Russians have been largely pushed back to their initial starting points. But I would need further confirmation of that. And then we come down to Bakhmut. Here, not too much information on the Crimea area. Sorry about that. The Ukrainians control the northwest to south and southeast and all high ground around Bakhmut, and control of virtually all the lines of communication supporting the Russian army. That'll be from fire control rather than actually interdicting them. The Ukrainians most likely, and this is personal speculation, will continue to advance towards Opitny, which is 2 kilometers south of Bakhmut. If we look at some of the other sources, Major Maxim Zhorin confirms that regarding Klishchivka, I believe that the enemy no longer has a chance in this settlement. But still talking about Klishchivka, I'm quite surprised at how long the Russians have been able to hang on around there. At least half of Klishchivka is fully controlled by the Ukrainians, and the second half is under fire control. That was from last night. No reports reporting that with reference to a Ukrainian major there. And if just to give you a reminder of the map, that is to the actually this is in Bakhmut itself. So I say that, and actually that's completely incorrect to me. So this is Peter Clifford just talking about how the Ukrainian forces have gained more territory southwest of Yahidne. So this is a Rose Alley area. There's the Amiga Hotel. I don't know if you remember, but the Ukrainians, I think, have struggled to really sustainably have success in Bakivka, which is just to the north of Yahidne here, or northwest, where there is a reservoir that has been pretty much emptied. The Ukrainians have been fighting over that. It's been a bit like a yo-yo. I think they're kind of redirecting attention towards Yahidne in the south, and possibly, even into the sort of northwestern areas of Bakhmut city itself. Peter Clifford goes on to say south of Bakhmut, more than 50% of Klishchivka is under Ukrainian control, and the other half is covered by Ukrainian fire, as we saw in the last source. Kurdyumivka is contested, so lots of activity still there. Here, I've got a video. I'll pause it though. Russian troops attacking a Ukrainian trench line near Krasnohorivka. In recent weeks, the Ukrainians have managed to gain control over more area close to Petrovsky district of Donetsk. This is to say that the Ukrainians have some success north, possibly, of... There are two Krasnohorivkas, and I'm going to have to check this out. There's one north of Donetsk and one south of Donetsk. This is interesting because The video comes from Misha Donbass. Misha Donbass, the person who ran that Telegram channel, was actually taken out, so is not alive anymore. So obviously taken over by some um, other people. But yeah, he was a drone operator in the near the southern Krasnoyarivka, by that mine that was attacked by the Russians, and then they were repelled, and cluster munitions were used there, and he was one of the people taken out by those cluster munitions being used. But anyway, Avdiivka, not really sure, because actually the Ukrainians have been on the back foot in a number of places around Avdiivka, particularly in the north, around Vesele and Kamyanka. So I need to do a bit of looking into that, see what's happened over the last couple of days there. There doesn't seem to be a massive amount of news coming out of the southern front line. We have, in fact, if we go to Poulet-Volon, nice summary here of what is taking place. So let's have a look at some of these maps. Here we have the no, it's Orikhiv, so it's Robotna. That's Pavlivka, so Vuhledar, Pavlivka. The Ukrainians have had some great success around Mikilska, pressuring down to the south. Not quite sure where they're going to go next there, whether they'll try and go through Mikilska or these dachas to the south of Vuhledar directly, or try and come in under Pavlivka. I don't know what this entails, because Poulet-Volon broadly uses Andrew Perpetua as his main source, so it could be some rejigging of the map rather than massive success for the Russians here, or the Russians could have pushed back, because we know that Ukrainians were pushing north of Shevchenko here. So yeah, I don't know what that is about, but yeah, Russian gains or rejigging of the map. And then we are going to come. Yeah, this is Bakhmut all pushing all over, but yeah, obviously nothing of Staromayorsk there, which is interesting in and of itself. Talking more about Robotna, how the Russians are pushing back, but the Ukrainians are trying to make gains in that area. I was listening to Andrew Perpetua saying that actually there's not a great deal of information coming out from here or Kamyanska to the west of there. So yeah, no reports here says in that particular sector. So this is, if we bring the map up a little bit bigger for you, here we have Robotna and Kamyanska to the west. So Ukrainian forces are moving towards Verbove. So that is here to the east of Robotna. Deputy of the Ministry of Defense, Hanna Malia, reported that Ukrainian forces breached the first line of defense, which is pretty much what I told you 2 days ago. So it doesn't look like an awful lot has changed. Footage appeared of Ukrainian units hitting Russia's first line of defense, the Surovikin line, with artillery and cluster ammunition. So, yeah, and there's footage of the Russians getting targeted, as you can see below here. Well, you probably, yeah, oh no, my face isn't there anymore. Footage of Russian forces getting targeted near Verbove, and he goes on to talk about Bakhmut, saying basically the same things as I've already said. So yeah, there is activity there, but not really too sure of any major gains. If we go back to Radiohosu just to kind of sew things up, and I want to go on to Kherson because there is some interesting claims coming out there. Robotny Tokmak axis, the first line of defense in the Surovikin line, has been breached. It follows that the main line south of Robotna is now a contested settlement, no longer in 100% Russian control. So that is the first time I've seen that being claimed. Velika Novosilka, which is further back to the east where we started, the southern front line really. Velika Novosilka to Mariupol axis, the Ukrainians continue to its counteroffensive through Uruzhany and south of Staromayorsk, and also west to Novodonetsk. Another contested settlement. I said that there were rumors that had been liberated, but wasn't sure at all. I don't think it has been, but that's the first time I've seen that being mentioned for a couple of days, and it does appear to be contested, at least according to this source. Ukrainians are now less than 8 kilometers away from the fortification line. That's south of Staromilnyivka, where they are aiming for. So there's a lot of more open land, but it is covered in smaller trench lines and dugouts in tree lines and whatnot. So although they seem to be further away here from Russian defenses, it's not that it's easy going at all. Um, so that is the situation there, which is not a huge amount of change. But on a Kherson axis, uh, he reported yesterday that the Ukrainians had reached Holopristan, which is south of or southeast of Kherson along the river, and means that there's a second bridgehead over the Dnieper next to the one in Oleshki. So Oleshki is the place where the Antonivsky Bridge comes over. And it appears that they have got across the river further to the south as well, near Holopristan. So he says this is great news for the Ukrainian armed forces because now they can really put the Russian commanders in an operational problem. Do we defend the new Kherson flank, bringing in reserves and defensive units from the southern front, or do we leave the Kherson flank almost untouched, which endangers the Russian line of communication with Crimea through Armyansk, which is now among the last ones the Russians can use to feed the southern flank and the Kherson flank? So that is definitely going to be something to watch out for in the coming days. That's really good news if the Ukrainians have got across the river in two places in a major way. Right, going on to military aid. Germany, quote, Germany has provided $1.55 billion in financial assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale war, says the finance ministry. According to Finance Minister Marchenko, Germany is one of the leaders in providing financial support to Ukraine, of course, after the US. That's miles ahead in front. But again, as I so often say, it's about how you interpret the data as a percentage of GDP, as a percentage of defense spending, as a percentage of per capita, so on and so forth. There's so many ways that you can look at this. So in real terms, the US is going to be like miles ahead, but actually in some metrics they're not. So as a percentage of GDP, they're in like 11th or 12th place. But even so, like the US is massively important because in real terms they're giving the most stuff, and Ukraine needs a lot of stuff, and so US are right at the forefront. More battlefield innovation from Ukraine. Thanks for highlighting, says Mick Ryan to another source. So this is Ukrainian front talking about this. Ukrainian military 125 territorial defense brigade uses a remote controlled drone to evacuate the wounded from the battlefield. I don't know whether this is actual footage or whether this is kind of training. I don't think just there. I don't think he's going to be going forward because there's a bit of a falling off the edge of a rock thing there. The machine is capable of transporting cargo weighing up to 150 kilograms. It's controlled by remote control with a range of about 50 meters and can cover a distance of 2 to 3 kilometers on a single charge. Okay, so interesting. Right. Yesterday, I talked about Germany not giving too much aid. Sorry, not giving the aid that they're promised quickly enough. And someone's done a fact check. So if you're German, this is just a Google Translate of it. Go and check out DEAIDUA, deaidua.medium.com for a fact check. Faktencheck Welt die trotz großer Versprechen. Yeah. Anyway, this is a fact check on the claims from the German mainstream media outlet that looks into whether they are actually delaying on a bunch of the promises that they have made. I'm just going to go to the conclusion. I mean, there's so much in here. Someone spent, as he said, his entire Saturday researching this. And how do you write a conclusion to such an article? Personally, I find it difficult to find the right words right now. It is very error prone. So that's the Welt article. Taken out of context and important key information is not mentioned. As a result, the reader is given a completely false picture of Germany's military support to Ukraine, which is to say that basically the Welt article wasn't quite correct on the claims that they are delaying on all sorts of stuff. So go and check that out. I'll try and give this a more careful read through to see where Germany is at with its. I'll just give you an article. In the article, the author goes on to write that the progress of arms deliveries has been reconstructed, and therefore hardly any of it has been delivered in the past 2 months. We have already established that the context is completely missing, and it is only logical that hardly anything from the package of measures has been delivered at the moment. That is why I would like to clarify something. Just because hardly anything from the package of measures has been delivered, it does not mean that hardly anything has been delivered in general. Every month, I publish a list of all deliveries to Ukraine on Twitter. This was provided by the German government of Germany to Ukraine in June, and there's loads of stuff being delivered there. So basically they're centering on a particular package and not having been delivered, and he's giving reasons why it hasn't been delivered. Genuine reasons. Is not just that Germany is sitting around with their thumb up their ass type thing. And much more. A detailed overview from June can be found here, and he lists and July as well. He links to those deliveries. Also, no Promise Aren't deliveries are included in my list above. These can be seen in tweets, which I've linked for June and July. Once again, these are support services worth more than 700 million euros. So one can really say that Germany is not. So no one can really say that Germany is not supplying weapons to Ukraine. Admittedly, strictly speaking, the Welt article does not say that either, but many have interpreted it that way. Interestingly, in June, I summarised that what was publicly announced by the federal government or industry for July. Conclusion: public commitments have not only been kept 100%, even more has been delivered. So you get the point there, and he goes into lots of detail about that. Right, I'm going to move on to a bit of a video here, and this is actually, interestingly, this is kind of confirmed on Andrew Perpetua's live stream the other night. Had language learner who is doing medical assistance and training in the war zone, basically, and he was saying that the sappers are really getting it. It's such a dangerous job, and they're doing so much of it by hand. And this video talks about this, how the Russians are just mining troops, the dead bodies and whatnot. He talks about, I don't know if it's in the bit I'm going to play you now, but he talks about how one guy, oh no, it does come later actually, I'm going to play that a little bit, but he's saying that basically in a group of 12 sappers, pretty much they're losing one a day. 12 will go out and 11 come back either dead or wounded. And it's just a really high attritional rate to these kind of troops. It's just a really difficult job. Anyway, listen to this, because there's a new type of footwear that's been tested out.
And find these explosives, and this is very dangerous for us. The idea came to mind like in the movies. One of my relatives lost a toe because he stepped on a butterfly anti-personnel mine. This shocked me, so I started thinking about ways to prevent such injuries. Working the production of protection gear, I turned to Ukraine's state emergency services with my idea. I had a prototype of some kind of steel boots at that stage. They rejected this idea categorically and inspired us to follow this type of boots instead. The prototype is from Canada. We had cases where 5 or 6 wounded people were brought in, and most of them turned out to be sappers. They had just been on a mission, were on their way back on the route that they themselves had already cleared. One of them stepped on a mine and was blown up. The 3 others approached him to help, but they also stepped on mines and were blown up. Yes, these things do happen. There is such a densely mined area that even one step away from the already cleared route may end rather fatally.
Там настільки щільна замінованість території, що один крок від прокладеного маршруту вже це можливо закінчиться дуже фатально.
So there you go. I was just wondering if there's something after that. A nice little video from Times Radio there that documents how difficult it is, initially documents how difficult it is for sappers to do their work, often doing it by hand individually because they don't have the MICLICs, they don't have the C4 and all the stuff that they need, or at least not enough of it, and those themselves become vulnerable to attacks by Russian artillery and whatnot. So when you're at the vanguard, at the front of the forces having to do the clearing, and you're often doing it like on your hands and knees outside of a trench in a war zone, it's just on a battlefield, it's insane. And so the attrition rate for these guys is obviously pretty high, but they're so important. What they're saying on Andrew Perpetua's live stream is that actually this means that the Ukrainians can only advance at the speed with which a sapper can crawl. I mean, that's basically one of the issues here. Like they're saying that this is the most densely mined area in the history of warfare. Just this is nothing that anyone has had to deal with before. So it's really frustrating for the Ukrainians because they've got all their forces behind to do their offensive operations, but they can't do anything until these areas are cleared. And as you heard, arguably once they clear them, you can just throw some mines behind, and it becomes really, really difficult. So yeah, this is why you need innovation. You need things like those boots or boot adaptations, and you need tech. So get some drones, some unmanned ground vehicles doing some stuff. Get as many Mikliks and mine plows as you can get your hands on, and C4. It all needs to go. You know, they were talking again on the live stream about how Ukraine just need ammunition, and within that you can include C4 and mine clearing charges and all sorts of stuff. They just need more. And on the Russian side of things, here's an echelon with Russian equipment traveling through the Bagorovo station near Kerch. So a few minutes ago, I passed passed through the Kerch bridge. The answer to the question, why is a bridge called a military target? Well, here you have a massive echelon of Russian vehicles traveling over the Kerch Bridge. These look predominantly like engineering vehicles and support vehicles as opposed to sort of tanks and whatnot. But yeah, that's quite a mix of vehicles on that train, and that is why the railway bridge across the Kerch Straits is a valid target for the Ukrainian army. Right. Yeah. And as you can see, that the Russians would appreciate all of that kit. Quite a variety there, and that's a pretty big train as well. So there's quite a few numbers of pieces on board. They look more like infantry fighting vehicles, possibly there. Now we're getting onto the tanks at the front, nearer the front. So yeah, the whole range of kit obviously on board. That's the end of the military age. Just a couple of geopolitical points now. Bear with me 2 ticks. There's probably an awful lot more geopolitical stuff that I haven't been able to get my head around or come across yet. It's obviously being on holiday, it's a little bit difficult. A few details have leaked from the Saudi Arabia summit. So this is peace summit where everyone's there apart from Russia. Even China have a delegation there. Italian newspaper Corriere reports participants agreed that the center of any peace agreement should be respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine and the supremacy of the UN Charter. This is really important. So of all those nations there, this is all about placing Ukraine at the center of this, and it's about balancing the narrative much more in favor of moral outcomes and Ukraine, and this will be so important for the international kind of narrative of this war. Yeah, and for some of those otherwise neutral, so-called neutral nations, they will be given straight up facts about what Russia are doing, with communication from Zelensky himself and from Ukraine. This is it's really interesting scenario, I think, and very, very poignant that China are there and Russia aren't. And then finally, the world should not be held hostage to the actions of one terrorist country, says Budanov, the head of the intelligence set up in Ukraine, in an interview with Bulgarian publication BTV. Attacks on a port infrastructure testified to another crime by the Russians against humanity as a result of Ukraine's reduction in grain exports. Insecure countries that depend on Ukraine for food are suffering primarily from Asian suffering primarily in mainly Asian and African countries. Ukraine is taking measures to restore export volumes and will start exporting grain again, whether Russia likes it or not. In the direction of Bakhmut, the offensive is a little faster than in the south, but time will tell. And Bulgaria has transferred a significant amount of weapons to Ukraine, and most importantly, it is increasing the production of new ammunition. The needs are very high, and for us, it is vitally important. Therefore, Ukraine will always remember the assistance provided by Bulgaria. That's really good to see, Budanov recognizing Bulgaria as a really staunch ally, particularly, as I've said many times before, in terms of ammunition supply. They, at one stage at the beginning of the war, they were responsible for a third of Ukraine's ammunition supplies, which was phenomenal. And that's because they are one of the few places that can still manufacture Soviet-era ammunition. And that's so important to throw into the mix. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I will be back with you possibly later today, but maybe not. But hopefully these 2 updates will keep you at least somewhat satiated. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.